All right. Okay, here we go. Another day of ShopBot training. My name is Ryan Patterson. Most of you already possibly know that. Looks like we have a good group today. I've got a total of 35 of us here. We are going to be working on patterns today and how to set up some random type patterns and get this set. So we have well, a couple options that we have here, showing you two different methods. One is basically just drawing out different things and then using an array copy that goes around everything there. And then another option, which is the better option down here, is the more random type flowing pattern. You can just see what the differences look like here. Once we go through the process on showing how to do this, we're also going to look at some of the 3D type work. So we're just going to jump into it, set up a random pattern, something like that's here. Once we get the two-dimensional section done, we're going to take a look at how we are able to create a 3D pattern type situation. And we're going to go right from the beginning. So a lot of what I'm doing is more personal interest. This is one of my two hobbies that I got in the middle of. Right now I am renovating an old VW van, and I am also into cycling. So a little bit of both within this project. To create this type of pattern, we're just going to grab the shape or the design that we want to be able to moving it over into the material. And just wanted to point out how it is that I got this shape here. It was basically, I just imported a bitmap and did a bitmap tracing of it. I did have to go in and clean up some of the nodes, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time cleaning that up, mainly because this is not a presentation on how to create a vector off of a bitmap, but just a quick little showing of what I did right there is just, selected the picture, used the little bird to trace around the selected color or the black and white image. But that is what I did there. So I am going to select this and group that together. As I'm moving it around, having it grouped together makes it easier to not leave any vectors behind. There's so many times that I end up working and just do a sweep select and then come in and move, and then you forget to select or didn't select at all until you're 20 steps into the process, and it's like it makes a mess of things. So having all of that selected and coming over and clicking the button to group now ensures when you select one of the objects here, they all become selected. We could always ungroup that later, and I will be doing so. But what we're going to do is just kind of place this on the screen, making sure that none of our items that we're placing here exceed off of the outside edge. We will basically set up a little bit of a pattern on how we would want this to look. Might take that one there and also make a duplicate of the van, holding the control key down as I move it. Allows me to make a duplicate copy of that. Just change the scale of that just a little bit. Maybe rotate that. Again, holding the shift key down makes, or control key down makes a duplicate copy of that. So I'm just kind of laying this out what I would call kind of an Hawaiian shirt type of pattern. And once you get all of this laid out in the way that you might want to have the pattern duplicating, we're going to draw a line, two lines, down the center of our material here. So we're going to start from the left with a line, drawing and snapping to the center of the item here, the material and drawing a line to the opposite side. I'm just going to hit the space bar to keep the line tool open, and then do the same thing with a vertical line. To speed this up a little bit, I'm just going to undo or delete what I kind of did there, and you'll see hopefully what's going to happen here and why I deleted that. The more we have on here, the better the randomness of the pattern is going to look. But to make it simple and quick to show what's going to happen, just kind of trying to keep it as simple as possible. So again, I'm going to make a duplicate of the bike, bring it down there, and also make another duplicate of it and bring it over here, rotate it around this way to where it fits. So at this point, we're going to start creating, everybody that's watching me at this point, it's somewhat hard to really explain what's going to happen until you see it done. So as you see what I'm going to be doing, you're probably going to be questioning what it is that I'm trying to do and accomplish here. And hopefully at the end of this whole process, you're going to say, oh, okay, it kind of makes sense, a little bit magical. So what we're going to do is cut and break this up into 4 sections: a top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. And to do so, we're going to be able to use these lines that we drew in there along with our scissors to cut this out to be able to separate this object. So the first thing I want to do to make it so that I don't lose what I have here through using the scissors and everything else, it's a very strong possibility that I might lose some of my design. So the first thing I'm going to do is do a sweep select of all the objects. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to set that and copy that to a new layer. So I'm just going to make a new layer, and I am going to call that just base. That is my base drawing, my base layer. We'll say okay to that. That allows me to now come over here to the layer and turn that off. So it didn't, remember, I only had a copy of it. So it's still there, and we see both of them. So we could turn the center layer off and turn the base layer back on, and it's still there. So our base vector data is still turned off, it's still there, and if we end up messing something up here, we're okay. We could always get our drawing back. So the first thing we need to do is start trimming this away. But remember, I grouped these objects together, and we can't use these scissors to remove grouped objects. So the first thing we'll do is come in, select the objects, and use the U on the keyboard to ungroup them. I could have also gone over to the edit objects and click the ungroup over there, but shortcuts make that just a little bit faster. So at this point, we'll just do a sweep select to be able to copy all of this. Now, this copy may not understand why I'm doing it right now, but hopefully in a few more clicks, you'll understand why. So I'm going to do a Control C. I could have also right clicked and select copy. Now I'm going to use the interactive trim tool and come in and start trimming these objects away here. I'm not going to worry about this one because we're going to delete that, and just working my way around the upper left section of this, making sure we zoom in and get all the little lines like that one there, and just trim away everything that is not inside of that upper right quadrant. So that is it for that one. So I'm going to close the scissor tool and just delete and remove all of these objects that are not there. Grab that center line. So the magical 2 keystrokes is that Control Z. And this project and this type of work also gives you a lot of practice on being able to zoom in, zoom around, pan, and so forth. So with that kind of completed, I'm just going to do a sweep select to sweep select all of that. And I'm going to type the letter G, which is the shortcut for group. So I group that together to make sure that it kind of stays together. I'm going to grab it and move it up off of the material, just moving it up into the upper right or the upper left, so I know that that was the upper left section. Doing a Control V. Now this is the reason why that I did that copy, because now we need to do the same thing that I just did there for the other 4 corners or quadrants of our line. So if you have any questions, you know, while we're doing this, feel free to use the chat window to ask them, and I could sometimes chew gum and talk at the same time, but not always. So again, just going around, making sure that it is all trimmed out. And close the tool there and remove all of these objects. Can I grab that line? All right, so this is the point where, you know, a lot of people, when I show this, start really questioning what's going on. And it's hopefully some of you understand what's going on already, but if not, we're going to see at the end. It's quite surprising. The first time people see this method tend to look, wow, it's quite amazing, until then you really look at it and you see what's going on. It makes sense. Again, making sure we zoom in to make sure that we get all of the little bits of lines that are in there. It's definitely good exercise and experience in getting around, zooming, trimming, and all of that. So we're almost done. Got one more section to do after we complete this one. Just going to zoom in. Oh, that's a terrible one there, but we're going to do it anyway. Thought the zeroing might have a problem with that, so I'm going to leave that off and not worry about that one. We'll be all right with that, I believe. There it is. So again, going in and selecting all of that. Now, one thing I just did right there was do a sweep select, going from left to right, because I want to make sure that I get all of the objects that are inside and selecting that bounding box. But in doing so, I happen to select an object that I did not want to remove, which is this line. So just holding the shift key down and doing a little selection of that is a, I'm going to remove that selection from my main. Oh, there I did. So let's try that once more time. Doing a sweep select to select everything, holding the control down or the shift down to select that line or deselect that line. And I could just delete the objects that I do not want simply by hitting the delete on the keyboard. And just remove that one as well. I'm going to group that together, letter G, and move that off to the bottom left. One more final one, a Control V, which is pasting back my original item there that I did way back in the beginning. And that is, it always stays on the clipboard until you copy something else. So that is that. So again, using the lines that I drew here to go from the center. Center is what we're using to trim against. We don't have to worry about. All right. So that is just about ready to see what kind of magic is going to happen here. I'm going to have to do some alignment tools here too. This is one of the benefits of, I can't remember, it may have been way back in 8.5 or version 8 that they put some of the other advanced alignment tools in that really has helped us out. So selecting that, grouping that one together, and just simply moving that down off of the screen. Now there's one little bit that caused us some issues there. I'm going to undo to put that back up to see if I caught that area that I didn't. So I'm going to ungroup that. I needed to trim this away off of the left side there, knowing that I don't have that line on the other parts. I want to create that. So we got to remember there's a little bit of a missing gap there, because in the end we'll end up with an open vector that's not going to be good for us. So selecting that, before I group it together, I'm going to move it off to the side, come down here and zoom in on that section where I can't quite figure out where it was, but we have to join that line together. So now I'm just going to group that section together with the letter G. Now the next thing that we're going to really do is this grouping is going to get placed at the lower right. The item that was in the lower right is going to get moved up into the upper left. The item in the upper right is going to now get moved down to the lower left. The lower left object is going to get moved up into the upper right. So that is looking a little weird, but we have to align this yet. I want to make sure that we are perfectly aligned to the top and the bottom here. And to do that, I'm going to draw out a rectangle similar to the way we did our center lines, simply using that line tool. I'm going to use the rectangle to snap from the bottom left in making it to the same size as the job size, which is X6 and Y6. So also want to make mention that this becomes the size of the repeating pattern. So every 6 inches, we're going to have a repeat of our design. So with that complete, we're going to say apply, then close. Just opening up this align selected objects. I don't have anything selected yet. We're just opening up the function to be able to align. And the alignment tools that we're going to use is this inside edge. And this is the reason that we drew that rectangle. So I can now select this grouping. And this is also another reason that I chose to group these together, because if they were not grouped together, all of these individual objects are going to get displaced and shifted to align to the inside edge. So with them grouped together allows it to move as a group, all of these vectors to move as a group. So with that first one selected, I want to align it to the last selected object and do the inside and then the top edge. So that just shifted around. I'm going to go around and do the same thing for 2 others or 4 others. And again, it's still looking pretty weird. We'll see if this is actually going to work for us. All right. So that is now gives us a lot of space in the center here for us to add more shape, pattern, or whatever it is that we would like. I'm going to come over and just grab one of these bike and bring it over and set it in place. Do the same thing for one of these fans. Just drag that over and place it here. We could scale that down a little bit. And, it's just positioning them and kind of trying to create a random type pattern within what we have right here. So just rotating some of these objects around. Another bike, and again, holding the control button down as you move a object, it is going to make a duplicate copy of that. All right, so there is somewhat of a pattern. Now this is where it kind of gets exciting to where you could see all of this come together. Now remember, my rectangle that I aligned all of these two objects to was 6 inches by 6 inches. So that then becomes the repeating pattern that we're going to create. So to do this, or to be able to duplicate all of this, I don't need to select any of these vectors here. So just to get rid of those, I'm not really going to get rid of them. I'm just going to move them over to a new layer. So with those selected, again, I just did a sweep select of the outer square that we drew, and also selecting the two inside lines. I'm really kind of probably done with them, but I don't want to get rid of it just in case I end up needing it later. But I am just going to right click and move to a new layer, or move to an existing layer, which was that base layer. Same thing, it's still there over on the layers tab. And there it is, which we could see the overlapping of our original vectors that we had. Again, just shutting that off kind of hides that. So now is, like I say, where the kind of the exciting part happens, where we could see all of that work come together. And we do that by using the align or the array tools. We're going to array this in a rectangular pattern. So clicking all the objects that we want to duplicate, which is all of our pattern. And it gives us the selected object size, which is that 6 inches by 6 inches. And this is where we say kind of the size of it. So if we want a 12 by 12 piece, now we want, 1 6-inch to go here and 2 to go up. So we want 2 in the Y and 2 in the X with a gap of 0. We don't want to have any gap in between these items. So here it goes. When I click the copy button, we're going to see if it all matches up and goes together. And sure enough, there it is. So we could see there is somewhat of a random random repeating pattern, I kind of call it. I don't know if that really works or is a word that you could use in this case, but by doing what we did by moving those quadrants up off to either side allows us to align everything to be able to completely repeat it. So I'm just going to undo what we did there so we could just kind of inspect now what really happens. And in doing that, this object here, I'm going to turn on our base layer, and I'm only doing that so we could select the objects that we started with. And just going to shift them off to the outside, just so we could compare our original pattern to what we ended up with to see what's happening here. So remember, we had the crisscross lines here, and this section down here got moved up into the upper left, and so forth went around. So now when we make a copy of this section here was down here. So this section is going to end up lining up with this section over here. So it is just the way it all gets, kind of laid out there. So again, I'm gonna select this, do a drawing over on the drawing tab, clicking that array. And this time, if we want a 2 foot by 2 foot section, we're gonna make a duplicate copy of 4 and 4, selecting copy. Now just kind of throws that all out there, and you see what I did there. I didn't mean to grab those lines. So again, I'm just going to undo, do a sweep select, and unselect those items there, or deselect them. Make a copy of those 4 and 4, which is giving us the 24 by 24 inch pattern. Now we're not quite ready to cut this because what we really have is grouped objects in items like this that aren't joined together. So what we really need to do is be able to join and edit those together. Might be off a little bit on some of our alignment tools, and that's the reason why they're not lining up right. But the first thing that we would have to do is come in and select all of our objects to ungroup them. And then once they're ungrouped, we would have to come over and make sure that we group or join all of our vectors together to get by with some of that misalignment that we had. I just wanted to increase that tolerance a little bit so that they're grouped together and closed those shapes for us. So now we are ready to be able to create a V carving pattern of this, or however we want to take a look at, or whatever we want to use this for. This method also works the same for a 3D image. So if you had a textured pattern that you created and it was made in such a way that the outside edges weren't going to touch, you could move the bottom right object quadrant. So again, zoom in here, move all of the items that are in this bottom right section up into the top left. Now, in a case like this one, would not be sufficient to work because we have this object that is out off of the material. So as long as whatever you design is not extending out past the outer edge of our repeating pattern original size, we could duplicate it. So again, it is taking everything that is in this bottom left or bottom right, moving it up into the top left. So this corner right here really becomes this spot up here, and the same thing for this corner here. Everything that is in this section is going to get moved up into the upper right. So hopefully everybody got that. It is somewhat of a hard thing to get maybe the first time you see it. I did go through it fairly quickly. Gonna just do a lot of undos here to get us back to the kind of the beginning, and gonna wipe this out. Gonna slow it down for a very basic shape, which is just a circle, to show how this works. So again, starting out with a line tool, snapping from the midpoint off to the opposite side, hitting the space bar to keep the line tool function open, and doing another line from the midpoint horizontally to create the vertical line. And this time I'm just going to hit the escape or close the line tool. And to keep this fairly simple so we can maybe better see what's happening, I'm just going to do this as a circle here. Just draw this circle out. And the way we create this is, again, going to make a selection of that, do a Control-C to put that on the clipboard, and going to use the trim function to trim everything away. I'm going to leave this one here because that actually could be up there. So this circle, bottom circle, is going to get moved here. This is going to get moved right there. I'm going to do a Control-V to paste that original circle vector back in. Use the trim tool to trim everything away that is connecting this one to where we could move this to the bottom left and this one to the upper right. And again, I used the rectangle to draw a rectangle out to the same size as our material. I'm going to set that to a specific size. I got something, so I'm going to scale it, unlink that. I'm going to set that to a 6-inch rectangle, and taking that and centering it on the job. So at this point is when we use our other alignment tools to center or to align this to the inside of our vector. So it's a little bit easier to maybe understand what really happened there using just a circle. So we could see now that the left half or the right half of the circle is really on the left side, the top, and see how all that flows together. So taking these items here and doing an array, leave it at the 4 or 6 and 6 with a gap of 0, and then copying that out, you could see that that just completed those circles. And again, we are not, all of these circles are not joined together. They're still made up of the 4 separate items. So to be able to cut this now, we would have to do a sweep select or select all open vectors. We could select all open vectors by right-clicking and going to selection, then select all open vectors. And at this point, we could type the letter J to open up the join function, increase that tolerance, select OK, then close. So we are now closed shape on all the items that and joined together of all the items that can be. So that is a repeating pattern. So hopefully that all made sense to everyone. Again, this is recorded, so we'll be able to follow through all of this at the end. So the next thing I want to take a look at is how to create a texturing type toolpath. So I will mention everything that we have seen so far is capable in VCarve Pro. So there isn't anything that requires a spire that we just did there. The next steps is something I should have verified prior. I believe this next process is only capable in VCarve Pro, in a spire, and that is on the modeling tab. I could be wrong about this. I have not seen VCarve Pro 10 in a while. And you could correct me, and the folks that are out there that are following along, it is this button that we're looking at right here. If you have that button in VCarve Pro, then yes, you are able to do what I'm going to demonstrate in VCarve Pro as well. So I'm not going to design anything in 3 dimensions or any of that, so we don't need a spire for that. I'm just going to come over to the clip art. And I'm going to go down and select a object, and I'm going to grab an animal. Let's say it's a dog that I was playing with earlier. There you are. So I had already had this downloaded. So to bring this into the job, all we have to do is grab it and drag it over and drop it onto our screen. You can see it on the 3D view, and there it is. Looking all right, looking all happy. Having that selected, I'm going to go back to the modeling tab, and I want to make them a little bit smaller. I don't want it to be this big. I'm going to create a textured pattern off of this. So we're going to scale him down a little bit. Right now, he is 3 inches by almost 5. I am going to link that back together. Remember earlier I unlinked that because I did not want to proportionally change the rectangle, but this time when I change the Y value, I want the X to change proportionally to what I've changed the Y. So putting a checkbox to link the X and Y, I'm going to change this Y value and bring that down to 3 inches. So notice when I did that, the Y value also changed to that same proportion. So at this point, let's select apply. And there he is. So it's only 3 inches high. He's looking a lot bigger because I'm only a 6 by 6 on the material. So I'm going to go in and change our material just a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it, maybe twice the size, or maybe up, let's go to 24 by 24. And I also need to change my material thickness a little bit, bring that up to 5 inches, or 0.5. So we'll say okay. So now we still have our 3D image down here, and I could tile this vertically by selecting here. So we see there's the image, there is our 3D file. So now we're going to take a look at how to create a kind of a textured pattern based on just that one component. So clicking this button here is selects. With it selected, I could now, not doing anything, I'm just going to see what happens by coming down and selecting apply. Tells me that that component needs to bake. Okay, sure, let's bake it. So once it is baked together, we can see that that is pretty much just duplicated that 3D graphic across the width and height of our model or our material size. A few things that we could do here. We have controls that we're able to play with the spacing slightly. So right now the spacing is kind of 0%. Whatever size it was is just kind of lined up, perfectly, just as we did with the 2D section. To create more of a textured pattern or background to this, I might bring that spacing a little bit closer together. And we can see now that 3D is kind of merged and blended together. We could specify an exact number here and a percentage, and that was only in the X direction. We could change that in the Y as well. So that is one thing that we could do. Let's reset that back to 0 and 0. And tab, and we're going to do this by selecting apply, back down to that original spacing. I'm doing that just so we could investigate each one of these items in separately. And the next thing is a shift in the X or the Y. We'll first maybe shift the Y over, like 26% or so. And you see what happened there is every other row has shifted over to the right just a little bit. Again, let's maybe take that to a 50% so we could really see what's going to happen there. Coming down and selecting tab, and we can see that shifted over half. So every other row now is offset. We could do the same thing for the X. So I'm going to set this back to 0 and see what the X pattern looks like for that. And again, I'm doing this this is also a great way for when you come into Aspire or any function button and you're wondering what it does. Only change one item at a time, click it, do it, see what happens. There is those two keystrokes, Control Z if you get backed up into a corner. So again, we're going to shift this in the Y direction this time by 50%, selecting apply, and we can see that that's just moves up. So let's see what happens when we do both, shifting the X and the Y. So it's just kind of shifting it around quite a bit there. And one more set of features that we have down here, we're going to take a look at before we do that. Again, just so we could see what is happening for each individual item. I'm going to reset that back to 0 and take a look at the reflection options here. So I'm just going to click 1, 2, 3, 4 buttons, like the 4 quadrants that we learned about earlier at that 2D view, are kind of what's happening here a little bit. So let's say I'm just going to click this upper right and kind of flip that around. We'll now apply, and we could see that upper right object right here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the same as 1, 2, 3, 4. That upper right got shifted and mirrored around. Let's try that one more click and we can see how that is. I think he's going to end up being upside down this time. So we can see that it is kind of upside down, rotated around. So that is back to that one. And let's take a look at how we could maybe flip this bottom left. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that is in the same order that we have right here. Let's rotate this one around, which this guy right here is going to end up facing to the left or to the right. I apologize, there it is. So he just kind of got rotated around. With those both selected, let's start playing around with some of the other settings that we learned about. Let's bring the spacing in just a little bit. Maybe it's going even minus 50%, only just to keep them, I don't know, even numbers. And I'm also going to move in the Y direction. Let's go a minus 25% and select apply so we can see what is happening here. I don't like the spacing of those ones. I wanted to separate that just a little bit. And I'm also going to use some shifting in both X and Y. And as we move these items around, we can see that we're kind of getting a more pebbly type of pattern, which could be an interesting effect. So when somebody is walking up to, say, a textured wall from 10 feet away, it looks like we just got a bunch of pebbles on the wall. But as you get closer to it, the item and closer to the wall, you're going to start seeing this individual shapes of the 3D dog head that we have entered in here. So this works with all, three-dimensional objects, and with the rotation around and the shape of the three-dimensional component is, really affects and could get some very odd, different type of textured patterns for this. So that is about what I have for today at the same time. All right, so the question is here, can I toolpath this? Well, not quite. Yes, I can, but we have some open vectors up here. So there's a few things that I would have to do. I have to come in and close all of these individual shapes to be able to toolpath that. So again, I will just do a sweep select of all of our pattern, do a ungroup and join that together. And we could always right click and do a selection to select all open vectors. And we could see that they are all the vectors around the outside of this. So they aren't going to really toolpath unless we do an on the line. So we would need to join these together. Couple things that might work, and we'll try it, a little bit of experiment to see if they work right off the bat. We have this button here that says with the smooth curve or a straight line. I think we'd have to go around and click that several times to be able to go around. There's one other thing that we're going to try, and this is what I did at the beginning. I don't know if anybody kind of picked up on it, but under the join vectors, there is this tolerance setting here. So it will join any vector that is within this tolerance. So I'm going to increase the tolerance of maybe, let's go 0.5. Let's just, we'll see what happens with this 0.5. I'm going to say join. Well, almost worked. It just basically what it did was moved all of our open vectors. I'm going to do a Control Z, and it moved all of these that are within that tolerance and just kind of moved them together. and close those points. So you might be able to get away with something like that, maybe even reducing our tolerance down a little bit. Again, right-clicking, going to selection, all open vectors to get that selected again. And we can see, yes, by reducing that tolerance a little bit, clean that up and now close those vectors. Some of them are still open, and that is because the tolerance from this endpoint to this endpoint is still bigger than what we had entered in there. So again, to kind of completely close those up, again, right-click, go to our selection to be able to select all open vectors, and we could again go in and view the tolerance, make that a little bit bigger. That sometimes causes issues. Or we could go in and maybe draw a line, a rectangle around the entire object, and then go in the scissor tools, or just come in manually and placing a line to join those vectors. So I hope that kind of answers that one question. So we'll mention that the bigger the pattern, or we started off with a 6" by 6" piece. If we started out with a larger piece that was say 12 by 12, that would have allowed us to fit more of these other objects in here to be able to rearrange and place those in place, and which would create a more random pattern type look. So the texturing toolpath option, again, I should have maybe researched it a little bit more to see when this was introduced. That may just be new to version 10. I'm not sure. When I decided I was going to do something on patterns and texturing, I just kind of came across that. I don't do a whole lot of work 3 dimensions. I don't hardly ever look at this modeling tab, even when I had just VCarve Pro. So I don't remember when that button became available. So version 8.5, I don't believe that is there. I can take a look. I do have 8.5 installed on here. So just open that up and quickly take a look. And no, it is not there. But this is 8.5, version 9 or 10, it may be there. You can import 3-dimensional models into VCarve Pro if it is, and kind of manually create what I just did using the array copy. So even though we don't have that manual or that automatic way of doing that, with a little bit of math and overlapping, we could create the same type of copy. And here we do have the ability to be able to do that mirror of it. So it is kind of possible to do here. The way it works in that texturing toolpath is it kind of links them all together and makes it easier to change it after the fact, to where doing it this way is just going to duplicate that model or that clip art across the material. So I've got a question about being able to copy a pattern or carving, not in the way copy in what we did here, but more of copying the physical item rather than one that we draw. The physical item is, you could use a touch probe. Now, can you use a touch probe on a rotary indexer? Not out of the box, you wouldn't be able to. If you're capable of a little programming or understanding of how X, Y, Z moves around and how to not record, but how to write files from the Shopbot control software. It is capable of it. The tools are put in place to make it happen, but it doesn't have it out of the box that way. Thank you all for joining, and hope you all have got something out of this. Again, this recording will be up on our Shopbot website